Time now to bring in longtime friend, although he won't claim it, and that is the voice of the Atlanta Falcons, the voice of the ACC network, Wes Durham. My friend, welcome back.
How are you, Steve?
Doing great, pal. How about you?
I'm good. It's ironic that I'm doing this show today because I'm actually doing my first Notre Dame game with Coach Shrewsbury tomorrow, and I have a couple Notre Dame games coming up, and I saw that Calvin Booth's son is playing at Notre Dame, and I'm just like, how much older do I need to be told I am?
No, exactly. Kerry Booth, who obviously had signed here and then, of course, was released, and then went with Micah to Notre Dame. So when you get a chance, please make sure, because I've texted him a couple times, but just make sure you tell Micah I said hi. And
I'm happy to do it,
And Mike Farrelly and all those guys there. Greg Diskinnis.
Great guy.
Yep. So it was an interesting year for the ACC. With what happened with Florida State. And Florida State, tell me if I'm wrong, entered the season mad anyway.
Now let me clarify a little bit of the national rhetoric about Florida State.
Let's go with that.
Yeah, because I think what nationally has been played out about Florida State and what reality is a little bit of gray here. The first thing that folks need to know is that Florida State paid Willie Taggart $18 million not to coach anymore.
True.
Okay. And that happened after Stan Wilcox, who was the athletic director that hired Willie Taggart when Jimbo Fisher left for Texas A&M, a blitz controversy there. And part of the reason Jimbo left because he was concerned about resources. Mm-hmm. The chief of staff to the president, John Thrasher, David Coburn, became the athletic director when Stan Wilcox left. And when Stan left, it was 6 months after Willie Taggart got the job.
Okay.
So Stan kind of may have seen the writing on the wall, if you know what I mean.
I got you.
So David Coburn takes over as the interim athletic director, and he is a politically, as you might imagine, university guy, chief of staff to the president. Yep. So Florida State really didn't do anything resource-wise. They hired Taggart as the football coach. Everything else kind of stayed status quo. Mike Martin retired as baseball. And the reason I'm telling you all this is Florida State turns around out of the pandemic. Michael Alford comes in as the athletic director, and you may have, if you follow the transactions of athletic directors, which is a lot like coaches now.
Yeah.
Michael Alford was not supposed to be the AD. He was supposed to run Seminole Boosters.
Right.
Vince Tyree, who was not going to have his contract renewed at Louisville for 36 hours, they thought he was coming to Florida State. And I tell you all that to tell you that Florida State finds itself in financial straits. And all that's starting to come around as a result of NIL and all the things we have now in our world. And then last August, Florida State decides that, okay, well, we're going to tell people that we're not happy. And look, they've got some gripes, absolutely, and they're right about some and wrong about others.
Right.
And then they have this unbelievable year, and now all of a sudden they don't get in, and it just refires that engine, if you will. So it's been an interesting fall for Florida State. Mike Norvell, though, amidst all this, Steve, it should be understood how good a job he's done rebuilding Florida State and using the portal efficiently and retaining players and developing players. And remember now, 2 years ago in 21, he started the season 0-4 with a loss on a Hail Mary to Jacksonville State.
Right. Remember that distinctly.
And Roddy Jones and I did that game. And so, you know, I think Mike Norvell's turned their football program around, and I think they are a factor, not just this year. I think they're going to continue to be a factor. But, yeah, it's been a frustrating year for Florida State, and I think in some respect now the ACC is seeing kind of its life flash in front of it a little bit, and it's going to be interesting to see how the league reacts going forward given the landscape of the expanded playoff.
Right, which brings me to the part about the grant of rights. And my point about the grant of rights has been you have to remember the landscape of the situation when everybody signed. Right? Mm-hmm. So there was a lot of logic as to why they did what they did when they did it, including the ACC network now being a part of this.
Mm-hmm.
from everything you understand, and I know it's a very simple 5 to 8 page document. I mean, in reality, I haven't found anybody yet who's found a way to get out of it, or at least found a loophole. Have you?
No, and a lot of people have claimed to, and a lot of people on what my dad used to call the internet jockeys have have said, "Oh, well, X school has found this, and they'll be filing." And I'm asked, like you would be regarding Penn State, I'm asked by a lot of ACC people in our travels this fall, well, do you think, school Y or school J is going to leave the league? And I said, well, when? Like tomorrow? No. Yeah. Can they leave in 7 years? Maybe. I mean, yeah. But I don't know the bank account of each school. I do know what some approximates are at some schools. And I also know, too, and this is the part that I think is really funny, we have schools in this country who want to make these moves. And in Florida, I'll use Florida State as the example. Yeah. And I have some friends who are, Seminole boosters who are, good, God-fearing Florida State fans. And they said, well, we're leaving the ACC. And my first question is, well, where are you going?
Right.
And they're like, what do you mean? I said, well, you have to understand that conference has to cut you into their pie because you're not going to be able to take a slice of this pie with you to that league.
Right.
And all of a sudden you start explaining the business side of this, and next thing you know, they're kind of backing off we're leaving. And I said, the most important piece about conference expansion, and you've seen it obviously with what the Big Ten has now done, you not only have to know who's in your league, you have to know why they're in your league.
Right, exactly.
And I would say this for the Big Ten folks, and certainly Penn State, and Penn State's move from being a football independent to a member of the Big Ten is a remarkable story, and it came at a specific time and place in the history of the Nittany Lions.
Right.
Well, it feels like Oregon and Washington have made the move at a specific time and place, very similar to Penn State. Feels like UCLA might be there by panic,
yes,
more than anything else,
and $104 million in debt in the athletic department.
That's the other thing. See, USC's there for a different reason. Oregon, Washington, other reason.
Yep.
UCLA's there because, like Maryland, UCLA needs the money. Maryland needed the money.
Yep.
And when the deal couldn't be, and I think we can say this now 12 years later,
yep.
when the deal couldn't be worked out with Georgia Tech and North Carolina,
yep,
they went to Maryland.
That's right.
And so reality is that, Bud Peterson, who was the president of Georgia Tech at the time, and Holden Thorpe, who was at North Carolina, they didn't feel comfortable getting into the political, mashings of what it would have been like to leave the ACC.
Right.
I think you have presidents and chancellors now who showed you in 2020 that they want that television revenue. They want it for athletics, and they also want it for their universities, and therefore they're willing to kind of break tradition to do it, and that's what we're seeing.
And Washington and Oregon made the long-term play because they're going to get about half of what everybody else did. And Fox helped fund that part of it, but they're not going to get, quote, the full share until the next TV contract comes up. But see, that's the long play that they're making at this point.
Yeah, and see, and in the case of somebody like, and I'll use the ACC for an example, how bad does SMU want to be in the league? Well, we'll come for free for 8 years.
Yeah.
I mean, we'll come on the, what I like to call the quick trip version or WOWY version of television contracts. We'll just come in and be a part of it, and then you let us know in the next. So, look, this is all predicated in my mind, Steve, to 2020 when they elected to play college football in the pandemic, and from the Big Ten how that posturing went.
Yep.
I know how it happened in the ACC and the SEC and some of these other leagues. When these chancellors and presidents said in 2020, we're going to play football, they didn't do it because they wanted to play football. They did it because of the financial ramifications on the back end. That's the bottom line.
No question about it. They knew that they would lose at the gate, but in order to keep the TV contract money, they did it.
Yep.
I mean, that's
exactly right. And in my mind, that gave us the ground to change everything.
Right.
And that's why I heartily endorse what Chip Kelly said last week. Nobody has been more clear and more defined about what this is than what Chip Kelly said last week, in my mind.
Yeah, no, and I agree. I mean, and he attacked it head on.
Yep.
And I think it's something that it was worthy of not just a short listen, but a long listen, and maybe taking some notes as to what he said.
Totally agree. Yeah.
I do have to. Your bowl game this week is which one?
I am. I'm in Tampa on Friday night. I've got a kind of an interesting week. I'm doing UK and U of L basketball on Thursday night, and then fly to Tampa Friday morning. And I'm doing the Union Home Mortgage. Union Home Mortgage Gasparilla Bowl Friday night at 6:30 with UCF out of the Big 12 and their first year in that league, in Georgia Tech, who I'm vaguely familiar with.
I'm trying to think if you have any ties to Georgia Tech. Just thinking back, you know what's interesting.
Yeah.
You know what's interesting about UCF, though. Let's see what you think about this. Everyone talks about Group of Five, and there certainly is going to be an exceptional Group of Five team that can step up. And at some point in this 12-team playoff, they're going to get an upset.
Mm-hmm.
But you saw UCF, Houston, Cincinnati, and BYU go to the Big 12.
Correct.
And they were a combined 8-28 in the conference.
That's right.
That's an interesting sample size, I thought.
Yeah, I think the UCF storyline, and I haven't really dug into Cincinnati, although I think I can look and tell a little bit about that.
Yeah.
For UCF, I think they've got enough speed in the Big 12. I think this won't be surprising to you. I think the question for UCF became their depth.
Yep, no doubt.
And in particular on the offensive and defensive line.
Isn't that always the issue? That's always the issue.
Yeah, but nobody wants to talk about it because it's not skill position, sexy, and ratings and all that stuff. But the reality is, I think Gus Malzahn, I actually had UCF in Florida 2 years ago in the same game.
Yeah.
Right after they kind of announced they were going to Big 12. Yeah, and Gus said then, he said, we might be able to get, this was Florida post Dan Mullen, transitioning to Billy Napier. And I'm not sure Florida was terribly interested to be there, but the idea of what UCF was getting into was fascinating to talk with Gus about, and that reality is kind of come fruition. Now, because it's Orlando, because they have 60,000 students, because I think they have plenty of positives in their resource bucket, I think UCF can be a factor in a league that is obviously evolving. Now with the addition of, Utah and Arizona and all the other things here, I'm fascinated by what that league's going to be. But I think they are speed ready. Georgia Tech is one of the faster ACC teams from a skill position offensively.
Yep.
I think we'll have an entertaining game Friday night.
Very entertaining. I have to ask you about the Falcons. I mean, there's been a lot of frustration with them during the course of the year. They're in an interesting division where you actually can make a move. What has been your thought watching it play out this year?
I think there's some really interesting dynamics taking place in Atlanta that, I've been blessed to do these games 20 years with Dave Archer, Steve, and every year is different. And people laugh because they say it's the NFL. Well, the rosters change. Free agency obviously is a factor. But here's the thing about Atlanta. They were so trapped in salary cap jail the last 2 years that this has really been the first year they could fortify kind of what they are and what they want to be.
Right.
For me, the transition's been interesting because they did a lot of their work in free agency to retool the defense, and they've done a great job there.
Yeah.
They've drafted well under Terry Fontenot's general manager's hat here the last couple of years, and that includes Ebiketie, who's been terrific here and is having a great year. But they elected to use the draft capital on the offensive side. So Drake London's there, Kyle Pitts is there, Bijan Robinson's there. They've done some things in the offensive line this year with Matthew Bergeron out of Syracuse. So it's been that kind of give and take with free agency, but they didn't have any money the last 2 years in free agency. I mean, we were signing guys on the back end of deals and all sorts of other stuff. It feels like they're going to have a similar number to what they've had the last 2 years, but I think there's more to it. Is that encouraging enough to keep fans, hope alive, if you will, for a team that hasn't been to the playoffs since 16?
Yep.
I'm not sure. I think that's the real tricky part. And yesterday was just, Desmond Ridder is an accomplished quarterback in the college game, but his pro experience has been really a roller coaster. And now he's got 6 red zone turnovers, including an interception yesterday on a drive that probably would have won the game for him.
Yeah, he's 10 touchdowns, 10 picks right now to this point.
Yeah, he is. And, he's got all 6 Atlanta red zone turnovers this year. 3 fumbles, 3 interceptions.
People will talk about not drafting a running back in the first round. And, of course, Penn State saw that with Saquon Barkley with the Giants as the second overall pick. What was your thought on Robinson being picked out of Texas, and what kind of impact, as time goes, will he have?
I think Robinson has a chance to be a game changer, but I think he has to be like anybody else, and I think they're finding this out in New York. I think Barkley is better when he's got a guy who can, come in and take a couple of at bats for him,
no
right?
doubt.
Yeah, and I think that's what the running backs have to be. Derrick Henry's the only guy living out here in the NFL now who's a solo hammer, right?
Yep.
And they're even using Tajay Spears, but they use Spears in like a third down scenario. But he's a complete change-up. Tyler Algier and Bijan Robinson have worked very well together. But Robinson's not going to run for 1,200 yards this year, and he's not going to catch 70 balls. But what he is going to do is he's impacting the game to allow Drake London to have a 200-yard day practically 2 weeks ago against Tampa, and allow some of these other guys to develop. But Atlanta's got a lot of things now, like I said, with the salary cap availability, that they can now go in and kind of do some more fortifying in this offseason. I expect that's what they'll do. But the big issue in this league, and it shows itself every week, all you got to do is look, is you've got to have day in, day out quarterback.
Yep, no doubt.
And if you don't, you're not going to be in the mix. I mean, everybody that's in the mix right now has really good quarterback play. Just about everybody.
Yeah.
And we got a lot of quarterbacks hurt, as everybody knows, but the reality is, if you're in the mix, and I watched the team last night play and take apart a team a lot of people thought was going to win the AFC South.
Yep.
But Lamar Jackson was really good last night and showed you why he's worth the investment. So,
no question. Hey, try and make the golf tournament this year. I know, look, I mean, I realize that we have to now schedule around the PGA Championship. I realize that. And that's not because he's playing in it, although I think he could qualify.
No, I'm not. My game has gone south on me, man.
That's because you're spending too much talking about it on the air and not enough time playing it.
Let me say this: a lot of people have found out in the last 10 or 12 years. Like, all my friends are in the Big Ten who do games.
Yeah,
and they're like,
I know.
Like when the ACC Big Ten Challenge went away, I was like, oh, that's stinks. And they're like, why are you so upset? I said, well, you don't think I understand. Like, all these guys in the Big Ten, I know. My daughter just took a job working in Washington for Northwestern University. I can't wait to tell Dave. And you know this because you and I have known each other 1,000 years.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, I've got like things I cannot speak publicly on about keels, LePay, Fisher, and dolphins.
Neither can I. Look,
exactly.
Yeah, you have to remember, this group, would it be safe to say, is Las Vegas. What happens there stays there.
Unbelievable.
Right? Am I fair?
I want to tell you, nobody. I mean, and my wife understands this, and several of my friends did. Had Georgia Tech gone to the Big Ten, I probably would still be there.
Yeah.
Because I'd be, like, hanging out with all my friends.
Yeah. I mean, all the time.
They'd be like, yeah.
Because last year.
People are like, wouldn't you have been sad to leave the ACC? Sure.
Sure.
But, I'd be hanging out with all my buddies.
I mean, plus you'd still see Johnny Holiday. What the heck?
Oh, the best.
Yeah.
Are you kidding? Has he ever come on your show and done the DJ
Oh, my
role?
goodness.
Stack the wax from all the way back, kids. Really?
I mean, the stuff he did with Tim Conway, he'd do on the show here.
It's unbelievable.
I mean, he's unbelievable.
And he's 80?
Yeah, he's 80. and he's 80, and he looks like he's 55. And he sounds.
He and Mary Claire
55.
are the sweetest people on the planet.
Aren't they?
Man.
Oh, my goodness.
He's the best. I love him and Coach Naki in basketball.
Yep.
He's got a Strachan. They do an unbelievable job. Johnny and my dad were great friends.
Oh, I know. Oh, no. Johnny talked about Woody all the time to me.
Oh, Johnny is sensational.
Yeah.
And he's got. That's why I want to hang out. I mean, hell, I almost came to Big Ten Media Day one time until I heard there was a big luncheon in the ballroom where they filmed The Fugitive, and I said, "No, to hell with that."
No, you're not going to do that. Not in that ballroom.
No, I'm not coming in that ballroom. Harrison Ford will chase me
Harrison
out.
Ford's going to walk in, and all of a sudden he's going to get in a fight in the back corridor. At the Hilton Towers. Here we go.
Oh, man, what am I doing, LePay? That's LePay. LePay's like the gatekeeper on me because, Keels and Dolphin will get you in trouble. Fisher's the ambassador.
Yes.
That's why your league is great.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how Jerry Allen out at Oregon is going to handle this. I mean, coming in Italy. Wait till Jerry goes to that dinner in Chicago at the kickoff.
Oh, yeah, Jerry, yeah. I've had Jerry on the show, too. So
he's great.
He's terrific. Good people. This is why we have a good time with us. Like, again, we've known each other as, what, your estimate was 1,000?
Well, let's see.
I'm
just say you know what? I'll give you the timeline.
Well, it's Marshall. Marshall's the first one, right?
Marshall was the first one. We played in the game in Huntington.
Vanderbilt.
When I was at Vanderbilt. I told people I did a game at Rec Hall.
Yes, you
Loved
did.
Rec Hall.
Yes. I'll tell you a story about that game later when we get a chance.
Rec Hall, awesome. Love it. Never been to the Jordan Center.
No.
And never been to Beaver Stadium. Can you believe this?
No.
Never been to Beaver Stadium. Never been to Jordan Center. But did a game at Rec Hall. Loved it.
and Penn State hasn't legitimately played games in Rec Hall since 1995.
So there you go.
Oh, yeah. One of these days, you ask me about that Vanderbilt game when you played at Rec Hall. I'll tell you a good story about that.
All right.
Yeah. Hey, appreciate you. You think we might be getting your booth? Is that true?
Yeah, I'll send you a picture.
Yeah, it's great.
Right. Hey, it's not Miami. You're not going to the Hard Rock, big boy, which is 32 out of 32 in the NFL.
Can't believe it's worse.
If you haven't heard about the radio booth at the Hard Rock in Miami,
wonderful. Well,
it makes FedEx Field look like Buckingham Palace.
And that's saying something. And on that note, I think the last time I saw you was Clemson last year, right?
Clemson a year ago in the ACC Big Ten Challenge. Yeah. So,
all right, pal.
All right. Call anytime, Steve.
You are the best, my man. Thanks so much. Thanks, Wes. Hey, happy holidays to your family, please.
Thanks. I appreciate it. Same to you. Be good. All right.
Knew how important it was to the organization to try and get Aaron back. So I was just happy that both sides kind of were able to look across the table at one another, decide that they both wanted to be part of this organization and have him part of the organization and make a compromise. And that's the best way negotiations can work, and it's great to have him back in the fold.
And not only that, but it was how quickly it happened. There was no prolonged wait for this, and that tells me a lot about both sides and how committed they were to each other. Is that a fair assessment on my part?
I think you nailed it. I think that's exactly what happened. They both looked at each other and said, look, we both want this to happen. What's it going to take? Boom, 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 boom. They get to it, and it's a done deal. So, yeah, I do think it says a lot about Aaron and his family, and it says a lot about the Phillies organization as well.
All right, so now here's the next part. Last year, I think everybody felt going into it, if they could come up with a shortstop and move Bryson Stott over, well, that would really help. And they signed Trey Turner. What do you see as the short-term and long-term needs of the Phillies based on how it played out this year?
Well, I think, and you could probably say this about almost every organization in baseball, certainly a little more depth at the starting pitching situation would be great.
Yeah. Whether
or not they can find somebody else, whether or not it's Yamamoto or another free agent that's out there that they think can help. I mean, this Phillies starting staff is pretty darn good. It's one of the best in baseball. But as we saw, you can never have enough pitching depth. So if they could add someone in that role, I think that would go a long way. And honestly, when it was all said and done, the biggest failure in the last, week of the season was their inability to get on base and score some runs. So maybe an on-base kind of guy they could insert in the lineup. The problem is, as you know, Steve, is there's not really a roster, well, not so much a roster spot, there's not really a position open to allow them to go out and, last year, shortstop was going to be open. So they went out and got what they believed was the best shortstop in all of baseball.
Right.
This year, every position is pretty much locked in and full. So there would have to be some kind of moves that would have went along with it. I don't think that's going to happen. It's certainly possible. Anything can happen, and Dave Dombrowski sees an opportunity to make the team better, and it involves a trade. I think he would pull the trigger in a heartbeat. But I think it's a lot more difficult this year to kind of fill that particular role just because there's no vacancy to be filled.
I think you are who you are. I mean, Rojas is still the same player I saw when he played at Williamsport. All right, still the same player, and that's not a knock. But it's just a way he plays. I always feel like if they adapted a little bit to him, let him bunt a little bit, let him use his speed a little bit, he could be that on base guy in the number 9 hole if they limited the swings and misses.
I think that's a fair statement. Here's what I think we're going to see this spring training when we arrive down in Clearwater in February. I think we're going to see Johan Rojas bunting 1,000 times over the course of the spring.
Yeah,
and I'm not really exaggerating.
Right.
They need him to do that, and I don't think he was very good at it when he first came up to the big leagues, and for whatever reason, that was not part of his game, or at least not a part of his game that anyone was really focusing on. And if he's going to be a big league player and an everyday player, that is what he's going to need to do. So I think we're going to see them spend an awful lot of time trying to figure out how he can get on base. And because if he can get on base, he certainly can do what they need him to do. And so, yeah, I agree. It has to be part of his game, the kind of player that he is.
Because defensively, he is a gem. I mean, defensively, incredible what he does. I mean, it's not just the speed, it's the routes he takes. He understands how to play really good defense. You
just have to watch him once or twice to see that. And we saw that very quickly in Philly.
You talked about starting pitching, which was a great answer. Why is it when we get to that 5 spot that we see more bullpen games now and people aren't developing a 5th starter, even a 4th starter on some organizations? Why is that? Because they can eat up some innings so you have a fresher bullpen. At least that's my thought. What's yours?
I'm in lockstep with you. The question is a great one. The answer is a head-scratcher. I don't know why they're not. In the world of load management and getting these guys and getting bullpens into games quicker and all of that, it has seemed to go by the wayside. The need for 5 quality starters to try and give you 6-7 innings every night. And I do think we're seeing the results of that, late in the season. We're seeing guys burn out. We're seeing guys tired, and we're seeing bullpen games upon bullpen games. I mean, can you imagine 25 years ago, a bullpen game in the World Series? It just, you couldn't even fathom it. And here we are. It's a regular thing now. Here's what I hope. I hope it's starting to come back the other way. I mean, as you know, as we were waiting to find out where Aaron Nola was going to be, every pundit, every baseball man, the woman that you spoke to, said, well, the great thing about Aaron Nola is he gives you innings. He constantly shows up every 5 days, and he gives you... Well, okay, yeah, because he's trained his body that way. So perhaps it has to start in the minor leagues. It can't start in the big leagues. It has to start when these kids are 18, 19, 20 years old. And if there's an emphasis to get that back into baseball, it can happen. It might take a couple of years, but I'd like to think that smart organizations are thinking about that.
Yeah, Glavin, Maddox, and Smoltz weren't missing a lot of starts. Ask yourself why. There's something that they were doing that needs to be. Now, obviously, they're exceptional athletes and well-trained,
sure,
but still. Now we've had an entire year with the rules. All right? So now we can at least evaluate nearly 200 games worth of between the playoffs, spring training, and so forth, about 200 games worth. What do you think?
For the most part, I like them. I think the pitch clock had its intended, the result was what was intended, and that was to make the games go quicker and be a little bit more interesting. I mean, for a guy that watches 162 a year, there were days in 2016 and 2017 and 20 where you're like, oh my goodness, is this game ever going to end? And I'm a baseball guy. I love it.
Right.
But let's be honest, it was getting boring. And I think Major League Baseball, despite all the pushback they got from players, and they're still getting that, they saw a need and they did that. And I applaud them for that. I know it's not the purest form of the game with the clock. However, it's the same game that we watched when we were younger. So to me, they didn't really change it. They're forcing it back to the way it used to be. So I love that. The shift rule, I love. I thought it would have a bigger impact, to be quite honest. I thought left-handed hitters were going to see their batting averages jump 20, 25 points, but we didn't really see that. But what we did see is more action, more ground balls getting through, more base runners, that kind of thing. And in terms of the bases, and that one to me is kind of whatever.
Yeah.
I'm sure someone out there could tell me that it had an effect somehow, some way, but I'm not exactly sure about that.
Yeah, so. I'm not sure either because I saw guys getting thrown out, and I also saw, I'm watching Arizona, 54 stolen bases, leads off with a broken bat single, doesn't move. Next game, leads off the game with an error to Turner, doesn't move. Like, at some point, I thought you stole 54 bases.
Yeah, and that's because, well, a big part of that is because the Phillies still have a catcher that can throw base runners out.
JT.
And so if you have a JT Realmuto on your team, you kind of negate that, or at least you make them think a little bit more. So again, develop catchers that, put some pride into playing defense the way JT Realmuto can, and maybe, you're able to curtail that running game in that regard. And that's the way the game's designed. That's the way it should be.
You have some players where my toe hurts and I'm out for 2 months. Then you have Bryce Harper.
Yeah.
You're around him every day. In reality, how sore, not hurt, but how sore was he as the season went, because he was still coming off something incredibly major? And how much better can he be next season, because he will be almost a year and a half removed from it?
Yeah. Well, honestly, Steve, I'd be lying if I told you I have any direct knowledge, but much like you, I speculate and watch him go through his work each day and go about his business. And I think to myself, man, he's got to be hurting a little bit, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just not natural to not feel the pain, but we didn't see it. And he certainly didn't talk about it, and he certainly didn't show it. And that's just a small part of what makes Bryce Harper so special. So the second part of your question, how much better can he be? To me, and the sky's the limit, because he's a generational kind of talent that has a work ethic, much like the greats of all time in any sport. And when you put all that kind of thing, all that together, you just never know how great they're going to be. He's already great, but can he do more? Wouldn't shock me, wouldn't surprise me, and that's only good news for the Phils.
Castellanos had a great run at one point. Then at the end, he slumped. What do they need from him on a consistent basis, especially when the money's on the line?
Yeah, I think Nick being one of the players that kind of suffered from that this year, probably as much as anybody on the Phils. They really need all of their guys to be more selective. Yeah. And I know it's so easy for me, sitting in the booth, to look down and say, well, I'd swing at that pitch, right? Sure. I wouldn't have even seen the pitch, and these guys are the best in the world, right? So I hate to knock them, but in the words of Dave Dombrowski, who is a lot better judge of what needs to happen, he says the same thing. They just need to relax a little bit and see the ball better than they were seeing it late in the season. And we saw each one of the guys kind of go through a spurt where they struggled. Nick's was late, and it cost the Phils. And, Kyle, no different. He's a guy that could swing and miss an awful lot, and Trey had his troubles early on. So, up and down the lineup, they're all such dynamic players. They all can hit for power. But if they have a knock, it's their inability to stop the chase. And that's really what they're going to have to focus on this year. And I know for a fact that is exactly what they're going to try and focus on this year.
I have not asked you about the bullpen yet. And a lot of teams that win normally get that. It may not be the career year, but it's at worst their second best year out of like 3 or 4 guys in the bullpen. It's either a career year or their second best. And that's why there's such great turnover in it. What's your confidence level in the Phillies bullpen and the depth of it moving forward based on the guys you see?
My confidence level's pretty high.
Yeah.
And I would agree with your premise, though. You kind of just never know with a bullpen. I mean, 2 years ago we watched Sir Anthony kind of dominate almost any time he took the mound. And then last year he certainly did not. Do I think Sir Anthony Dominguez can bounce back and be a dominant reliever again? Absolutely. He certainly has the stuff. So,
right.
If they get another year out of Sir Anthony that we've seen in the past, they're going to be better in that regard. Alvarado is another example of a guy that, was hit and miss when he was in Tampa and has been, pretty darn good here in Philadelphia.
No doubt.
The bullpen piece is, you just hope that you get guys having career-type years in the bullpen. And I know, again, Dombrowski's thought process with the bullpen and how important he believes it to be, and we've seen that since he's taken over, just how much better that bullpen has gotten. He has a knack for keeping a bullpen strong. So I think he'll make some tweaks back there. They've got a lot of young, hard-throwing, talented guys back there. In fact, they have a plethora of them. They have probably more than they need in the system. So that's what you want, because if one guy's not going, you can switch him out, bring someone else in, and hope that he gets going. So my confidence level is pretty high that the Phillies bullpen will be among the National League's best once again.
Well, my confidence level is pretty high. You're always going to give us great talk, things to discuss, so I always appreciate it.
Absolutely. It's going to be fun. Won't be too long.
Well, it won't be too long, although I was out there with a huge parka on yesterday, so, so I hope it gets here sooner. And I was in Orlando last week, so what the heck?
Okay. Oh, geez. Well, that's not good.
Yeah.
Hopefully, come February, it's a little bit more temperate down there, and we'll be ready to go.
Greg, always a pleasure. Thanks a lot for your time. Really appreciate you and all the great work you do.
Well, thanks, Dave. Always good to talk to you. Anytime.